think the concept of analytics might be the most misunderstood aspect across all sports, and that's for a number of reasons, some more justified than others. I think part of it is a product of former players having seen their sport change so dramatically and need someone or something to blame, and so they point at the scrawny dude in the back crunching numbers.
So, first of all, I've always believed analytics was crap.
I think part of it is also scrawny dude in the back crunching numbers landing a TV gig and then proceeds to spew out numbers that quite literally no one understands. And I think another part of it is our own ignorance as fans, myself included, thinking that there's no way our eyes aren't good enough to analyze the game on our own. That we could be watching the same game as the scrawny number cruncher and come out with two very different conclusions. To some of us, it's crazy to think that there's actually someone who, by using data, could tell us that the same turnaround mid-range shot we watched players like Kobe and Jordan, two of the best to ever practice, master, and embarrass dudes with for years, is actually a bad shot. Some might look at that and see talent, skill, and artwork. Others will look at that and see an inefficient shot, and rather the player step back a few feet and get an extra point for all their efforts. But the problem here is that if that's how we're going to look at analytics, I think we're doing the entire discussion a disservice. Analytics aren't just algorithms outputting what shot to take or what lineups to play. And sure, that's part of it, but they're actually so much more and so much less than that. They can be way more complex or way more simple. So I want to focus this video on answering two questions. One, what are analytics actually and how are they used? And two, what is the business of sports analytics and which companies are leading the industry? What I am not here to do is argue about whether or not analytics have screwed up sports, because that's a much larger conversation and it's not for this channel. It's not. That's my cop out. When anybody ever wants to know my opinion about something, I'm gonna just hit him with that. We talking about money. If it ain't about money, I don't want to talk about it. If it ain't about business, it ain't about me. That's a fucking bar. That's a bar. If it ain't about business, it ain't about me. Okay, so first and foremost, what are analytics? Oxford defines it as information resulting from the systematic analysis of data or statistics, which, to put in other words, is the outcome from analyzing different pieces of data. Let's run through an example. One of the most basic examples of analytics in sports is field goal percentage. I take two different data points, the number of shot attempts a player makes and the total number of shot attempts a player takes. Divide them by each other and I can get a new data point, their field goal percentage, or in other words, the percentage of shot attempts that were successful. Ideally, we would be able to take two players, look at their field goal percentage, and know which player was more efficient than the other, and therefore use analytics to decide who should be taking more shots. To put it simply, if player A shoots 50% and player B shoots 47%, I'd probably want player A to take more shots. Now, of course, it's not that simple. This analysis only works if they're taking the exact same shots from the same part of the floor against the same defender at the same point during the game. This also assumes that they have the same height, weight, play the same position, and have the exact same plays called for them. The goal of a lot of these analytics departments is to take all these variables and figure out a way to make them equal so that you can make decisions like which players should and shouldn't be on the floor. So, for example, if player A shoots 50% from the field, but their primary position is as the team center, that's actually around average, if not below average for that position. And that's because as a center, they're usually the tallest player on the floor, and therefore the shots they take are going to be closer to the rim. So 50% for that player isn't all that impressive. However, if player B, who shoots 47% from the field, is a guard, this is actually really impressive, and in fact would put them at one of, if not the highest field goal percentage at their respective position in almost any given year. This is because as a guard, the range of shots I'm expected to take are much wider, including more difficult shots like mid-range and three-point shots, which are further from the rim and therefore more difficult. Also, we have to take into account the number of shots a game a player takes. So if player A only takes 2 shots a game, they only need to make 1 in order for them to have a field goal percentage of 50%, and 1 make a game isn't all that impressive. And let's say the 2 players did take the same amount of shots. Let's say they even made the same amount of shots such that they had the same field goal percentage. This still wouldn't tell the whole story because the guard is expected to make more 3-point shots than the center, who would be taking more 2-point shots than the guard. As a result, even with the same amount of shots taken, I may still prefer the guard over the center since they scored more points on the same number of shots because the guard made more threes. Really what I'm getting at is there's a lot of variables that need to be taken into account. We can't just simplify which player is better by saying this one scores more points or this one has a higher field goal percentage. So what was the point of all this? The goal here is to actually run through the different kind of thinking and different type of variables that an analytics department of an NBA team, or really any sports team, might have to go through to answer these questions. And the question still still stands. It's still a very simple question. How can I know which players on my team should play over others? But it's the answer to that question and the amount of analysis that goes into answering that question that separates the good analytics departments from the bad. The analytics process, which is not an official term, and says something I coined simply so I could understand for myself how this process works. I really had to dumb it down for me. So if it seems overly simplified, forgive me, I'm an idiot. I split the analytics process into 3 phases, and I'm doing a lot of hand motions here, but that's just how I explain things. I use my hands. The first is data collection, which is the process of collecting data, like the number of shots a player has taken, the number of shots they've made, etc., etc. Once I've collected this data, we move into the second phase, which is data analysis. We have the data, now let's try and make sense of it. And how can we use this information we collected to identify some new piece of data, which can be used to make a decision, like picking the more efficient player on my team. Once we completed the analysis, we can now jump to the third phase, application, where we apply the analysis into the real world, such as setting our lineups to favor the more efficient shooter. So let's run through this. Let's start with the first step, data collection. More specifically, what type of data do teams collect and how do they collect this data? Now, there's some really obvious stats that we all know teams collect and can use for different types of analysis. We know in basketball, they use stats like points, rebounds, assists, steals. In soccer, stats like passes, tackles, saves, shots on target. And in football, they use yards, catches, attempts, completions, and interceptions, among others. These are easy to count and to quantify, so we'll call these counting stats because that's how they're collected. You just count the amount of times each of these events happens during the game. Then there's a second, more complex set of data points that teams will utilize. Let's take the NBA as an example. In 2009, the NBA started installing motion capture cameras in every arena in the league. The goal for this was to start collecting data from player movements in an effort to allow teams to leverage this data to perform better, more comprehensive analysis on their players. The idea here was pretty cool. They essentially looked to create a version of the game that could be understood and analyzed by computers. These cameras aren't performing any analysis. They're only translating what our eyes can see in a format that's understandable to a computer. The main output from these cameras is really just a bunch of circles meant to represent each player and their respective movements on the court. It's then up to whoever has access to this data to make sense of it. This was also a subtle business move on behalf of the league, where they also made this data available to third parties, but at like a crazy cost, like in the millions. I know this because my day job deals quite a bit with data. And one company I work for actually looked at potentially purchasing this motion capture data. They ended up passing on the deal and instead opting to invest in their own facilities in order for them to be able to collect the same data. So they built a basketball court with the same motion capturing cameras you get in an NBA arena, but took it a step further by adding like legit pressure sensors under the court. It was insane. It was wild. Sometimes too, you'll also see players wearing small vests underneath the jerseys. You see a lot of this with like soccer players after they score a goal, they just take their jersey off and then you just see like little black vests where their beautifully sculpted chest is supposed to be. These vests add additional accuracy and motion capture data and have both GPS and heart rate monitors to help track stuff like athlete performance and health. And this by no means a comprehensive list of different tools used. In fact, that would make for a pretty solid video. I gotta write that one down. These are just some examples of how teams collect data on their players. Once collected, this data is then used to train models to look for different things. And a computer has no idea what basketball is. So it needs to be trained to identify each and every aspect of a game. It needs to learn what a dribble is, a shot is, a block, a steal. It also needs to be able to identify different types of shots, like a wide open shot versus a contested shot, or a 3-point shot versus a layup, as well as common plays that occur, like a pick and roll or a give and go. Hey, I like a pick and roll. I like the give and go. It's basketball. Now, about we playing basketball. We love that, man. To do this, they train models by using a concept called machine learning, which you might have heard before. Really, all this is taking a bunch of examples of something and feeding it into a computer until the computer can identify it on its own. A very basic example of this is if I want to build a model to identify what a dog looks like, I just keep feeding it pictures of a dog until it can identify it on its own. And it's pretty much the same thing here. If I want to train a model to identify a turnaround jump shot, all I need to do is just keep feeding it examples over and over again, sometimes hundreds of thousands of different examples of a turnaround jump shot until it can accurately define it on its own. So Who is training these models? And how is all this data being interpreted? Well, that's where we can start focusing on the business of this industry and where we can get into the second phase of the analytics process, which is the analysis. Now that we've collected the data, it's time for us to make sense of it all. It used to be the case that much of this analysis was performed exclusively in-house by each team, which is still very much the case. But there are companies that have looked at removing much of the burden for sports teams by performing a lot of the basic analysis that teams would otherwise be burdened with doing on their own. One of these companies is Second Spectrum, a company partially funded by Clippers owner Steve Ballmer. Second Spectrum, who is the official tracking and analytics partner for leagues such as the NBA, Premier League, and MLS, work with these leagues and other sports adjacent companies to provide them with a few different solutions. One of their main offerings is instant breakdowns and analysis, leveraging a suite of machine learned video indexing or machine learning models to help teams almost instantly conduct analysis as soon as they upload film of their game. It'll output basic stats, so your counting stats, points, rebounds, goals, touchdowns, but it'll also provide more in-depth analysis like we spoke about earlier, which plays were run, shot selection, possession, number of crosses, just to name a few. Imagine uploading your rec league games to this program and getting all these advanced stats almost instantly. It's kind of wild, right? Their other and arguably more recognizable and cool offering leads us into the third phase of the analytics process, which is the application of all this data. We've trained our models to be able to figure out what happens on the court or on the field. Now we want to know the different ways this information can be used. We can toss these into a few different buckets. The first, really cool broadcasts. Second Spectrum's capabilities unlock this really cool feature, which is their augmented reality streams, showing stuff like animations, real-time plays, shot probability, names under the players. It essentially takes all this data that's outputted by the program and it creates real-world animations showing this analysis in real time and kind of gives the broadcast like a video game feel. We saw this in action on some of these second streams ESPN did for the NBA Finals a couple years back. These were kind of cool. It was kind of lit, man. I'm not gonna lie to y'all. I would watch this. I wish this was still available today. It's kind of dope. I know it's a little bit gimmicky, but this just scratches the surface on what the future of sports broadcasting will look like. Another example of this was just announced by Oscar De La Hoya's fights, now showing on Bally's Stadium, where they'll be showing a power bar in fights, like Street Fighter power bar. They've attached sensors in the boxer's gloves that have been approved by the California State Athletic Commission, which will be used to show both impact and fighter health, kind of like Street Fighter. It's kind of wild. Now, to be fair, at the time of making this video, I couldn't find any videos online of this just yet because I recorded this immediately after those fights happened. That said, once I go through posts, I assume that those will finally be online. But just in case, you know why I didn't show any film of it, probably because it ended up sucking. You know what? I might just keep this in there just in case, because I have a good feeling it's going to suck. It's probably not going to work very well, or it'll be just extremely gimmicky. So it's either going to suck or it's not going to be online. But I think it's just going to be online, but it's going to suck. Now, that's the first way this data is applied in broadcasting. The second way this data is applied is in decision-making by a team's front office. This is generally what we think of when we think about analytics. This is where teams use data from Second Spectrum, as well as other sources like sensors the players are wearing, other tracking data, and counting stats to begin making decisions about who should be playing, when they should be playing, and whether they should rest their players. Now, generally, this type of analysis is usually performed exclusively by the analytics department within each team. If we use the NBA as an example, all 30 teams have an analytics department, though some are more invested in it than others. Now, these generally include some combination of data scientists, engineers, and directors. As of 2020, teams like the Bucks, Blazers, Cavs, and Jazz have 2 people on their staff as officially listed members of their analytics department, which is the lowest in the league. The highest are the Washington Wizards with 9, and the Sacramento Kings are right behind with 8. So clearly, there is no correlation between performance and the size of your analytics department. In fact, honestly, you could kind of argue it's the opposite. Seriously, no team that's won a championship in the last 5 years has had more than 3 people on its staff. But okay, that might not be the full picture, because some teams have now begun outsourcing their analytics department, or at least partnering with third-party firms to conduct some of their analysis. One of these firms is Zelus Analytics, who provides an interesting proposition. Why have 30 teams hire 30 sets of analytics departments who are all going to be doing the same job and crunching the same numbers anyway? Well, we can provide all that. Just hire us instead. We have more resources at a much lower cost. Now, there's an obvious red flag here that pops up almost immediately, which is the potential for a conflict of interest. Imagine if both teams in the NBA Finals had outsourced their analytics department to Zelus. Who gets the favorable game plan or the better data scientists and engineers? As for Zelus provides some reassurances. First, Zelus doesn't actually present itself as the replacement to a team's analytics department, though it does very much look and seem that way. Instead, they present themselves as a complement or as an additional resource. From their perspective, teams should still have their analytics department. They're just there to help with the analysis. But even if teams do end up outsourcing entirely to Zelus, they do implement some pretty heavy restrictions on their business model by limiting the total number of teams they can work with. In the MLB, for example, they cap it at 6 teams total across the league that they can work with, and that's 1 for each division. In soccer, it's capped at 1 team in each league. In the NBA, that's TBD, as they're only now making inroads into the league. So not only are there companies like Second Spectrum collecting and analyzing the data, there are also companies like Zelus who are helping teams make decisions by performing additional analysis and using proprietary models to help the teams they partner with gain a competitive advantage, while also significantly lowering their costs. The last application we'll touch on is in gambling. This one feels relatively obvious, and it's how sports books and apps like FanDuel and DraftKings are able to calculate their odds, predict over-unders, and assign values to different players based on their respective matchups. One company, though, does take this to a bit of an extreme: Ayrton Risk Management, who is a division of gambling giant Flutter Entertainment. Ayrton Risk Management has a very interesting business model. Let's say I'm a company, Nike, for example. I put an incentive in Kylian Mbappe's contract stating that if he wins the World Cup, he can get a €4 million bonus. If I'm Nike, there's a decent amount of risk here. He's already a World Cup winner and is playing on a team that's talented enough to maybe win it again. So rather than taking the risk of paying Mbappe $4 million if they win, I choose to instead go to Ayrton, who agreed to instead take on the risk for a fee. How they come up with that fee is where analytics come in, which they use to identify the risk or probability that France win. Based on their calculations, they provide Nike the following proposition: you, Nike, pay us €500,000, whether or not France win. If France does win, we take on the risk and we pay Mbappe €4 million. If they don't, we just made $500K. They shake hands, slap butts, and go on with their life. Now, this is Ayrton's entire business model, where they attempt to calculate the likelihood of different outcomes for sporting events and draw up contracts helping clients hedge against that financial risk. The goal isn't actually to take on risks like this, though. They're not gambling. In fact, it's quite the opposite. They want to sign as many of these contracts to ensure that they've hedged their bets. So they would actually look to sign similar deals with other companies that have similar incentives. Let's say Jadon Sancho, who plays for England, has a similar clause in his contract. Ayrton would look to sign a similar contract there to hedge their bet as well. Ideally, they would do this at scale and get as many of the teams in the tournament as possible, such that regardless of the outcome or who wins, they turn a profit, because the amount of fees that they take in is more than anything they'd have to pay out to any individual player. And they can do this by using much of the same data that's used by these other companies, but instead of using it to win more games, they just use it to win more money, which at the end of the day is what they're all doing anyway. Isn't that what we're all doing? We're doing everything for money. A little bit of love, sprinkle of fun, but man, we here for the money. If it ain't about business, it ain't about me. That's such a bar, man. Speaking of bars, it's the best bar in the game. Alright, this video is going off the rails. Alright, I think we covered it a lot. I think we did a good job, right? I think we did a good job. But hey, let me know what y'all think. Did this video change the way that you looked at analytics in sports? Did it reinforce what you already believe? Should I never speak about this subject again? Let me know in the comments below. Otherwise, I just want to say thank you again to each and every single one of y'all for making it through this video. If at all possible, again, I hate to ask. I hate asking. But if you can hit that like button, if you can hit that subscribe button, that would mean so much to me. I'm trying to build this up, and hopefully we can turn this into something where it's big enough that I never have to ask again. I hope I never do. But until we get to that point, yeah. Bless me with some support if you can. Otherwise, check out these videos. You might find them entertaining. If not, just click on it. Might be better than this one. It probably is. Yeah, you might like them. Even if you don't like them, it's more me. I need to end this video. I love y'all. Thank y'all so much. For real. Appreciate y'all, every single one of y'all. Peace.